So through the course of the evening, there will be a 30-minute talk, guided meditation, and then a Q&A. Throughout the entirety of it, feel free to get up, move around, use the restroom, get some water, anything it takes to make yourself comfortable.
You should definitely do whatever it takes to make you comfortable. Whatever that might be.
Within reason.
I don't know about that. I think you can, if you can be comfortable, you should do that. If you can't be comfortable, you should note that. So before we begin, regarding last week, I wanted to mention two things. One is that it was nice to have a child here, and any of you have any kids you want to bring, please do so, and know that, in fact, you can bring anyone. We go out of our way to make sure that everyone is welcome, and whatever those people may have to offer, we accept that as an offering of wisdom, even if that's screaming. And many of you know, over the course of the many years of being here, we've had screaming and many other kinds of expression of many different kinds, and all of it is a gift. All of it is an offering. The other point was that I mentioned that the Zen master I talked about last week was named Basho. That's not true. His name was Bankei. Basho also, very interesting individual, but that teacher was named Bankei. Well, it's exciting to see so many people here this week. In terms of Buddhism, the training, the teaching, begins with three fundamental pillars, or you could say skills. Those are generosity, which we started with a few weeks ago, patience, which we talked about last week, or acceptance, forbearance, and then finally ethics. And for many different reasons, these aren't popular topics. So if you advertise that you're going to talk about generosity, it's expected that fewer than average people will attend that talk. If you talk about patience, then somewhat more people. But in general, ethics is the one that brings the fewest of all. And there are a lot of people here tonight, so that's very exciting. Ethics, morality, virtue is a topic that makes a lot of us uncomfortable, and one of the main motivating forces that's been used in order to compel us to behave in ethical, virtuous, moral ways. In our particular tradition, cultural sphere, is shame. And naturally, we don't want to experience that too much, so we don't always feel excited about coming to talk about this. I would like to radically transform the way that we think about virtue, the way we think about ethics, from a shame-based behavior to a game-based behavior. So let me lighten the mood. This ethics is heavy. Let me lighten the mood in the way that I typically do. Sorry to those of you who experience this more than you'd like, but the way I usually lighten the mood is with a sports metaphor. So let's talk about sports for a little while. Sports, as I like to say, is useful because it's life minus everything important. If you take life and remove everything important, then you're left with sports. Yes? So it's helpful. And I like sports a lot. I've played a lot of sports in my life, and I think they're very good. Good for us. Games are very good for us. very healthy for us, very meaningful for us. I think we should value games even more than we do, as long as we remember that games are games, they're not life. And if you consider what is it that a game is, a sport is, when you take all the important stuff out of life, you're left with what? What's left? And as far as I can tell, there are really just two things left: winning and losing, which doesn't matter, and rules, which also don't matter. And yet, when we cast ourselves into winning and losing and rules, our minds are defined in brilliant relief, in stark vividness, which you see happen. You see what happens to people when we get involved in sports, when we get involved in games. What's happening inside of our minds often comes out and is no longer just inside of our minds. It fills the room sometimes with our shouts and our jeers and our cries and our celebrations. And so it's very interesting to look at sports as a way of approaching ethics, morality, which does matter. How we live does matter, in a way that how we play tennis doesn't matter. So in just the same way that how you play tennis doesn't matter, how we live life does. So let's look at, say, tennis. In tennis, there are lots of rules. Many, many rules. And a lot of those rules are absolutely clear rules, like if you hit the ball so that it lands to the left of a certain line, then you win, and if you hit it so that it lands to the right of a certain line, then you lose. Well, that's very clear. There's nothing unclear about it. And you need to know where that line is. You need to know exactly where it is. And so in the case of tennis, people are very kind, and they actually draw that line on the ground for you in paint so that you can see it, and so that people can more or less agree on whether the ball landed to the right or the left of that line. It's very clear that you have a certain number of bounces. The ball can only bounce one time. If it bounces two times, you lose. But other things aren't as clear. What is it exactly to unfairly distract your opponent, for example? Well, that isn't clear. There's a general sense of it, but people will disagree about that at times. In any case, it's shared knowledge. It's open, public, and agreed upon that certain rules control the progression of a tennis match. So, while it's true, I've taught tennis a lot. I've coached tennis a great deal. And while it's true that in the very beginning, when I'm teaching some tennis to someone, say the age of the kid, Mabel, who we had here last week, we don't really get into where the lines are and other rules like that. Because at that time of learning, you're learning what tennis really is. And tennis ultimately is only hitting the ball. That's all tennis is. There's nothing else. If you enjoy hitting the ball, then you're playing tennis well, and that's it. That's all tennis is. But in order to become better and better at enjoying hitting a tennis ball, it turns out that having those rules is really helpful. And so once a person gets a little bit older and has a harder time just hitting a tennis ball, then you introduce rules so that those rules will distract them a bit, and they'll stop thinking about so many things and once again return to just hitting a tennis ball. It actually works. It may seem as if adding distractions to distractions would distract us further, but it actually helps us to focus. And so we give people some rules, some lines, and they learn about those rules and those lines. And if you imagine a kid learning about all that, learning how to play tennis, just imagine a kid, 5 years old, 10 or so, 15 years old, learning how to play tennis. Just imagine it for a second. Doesn't seem so bad, does it? Right? It's not so bad. They're learning to play tennis. It's fun. It's actually something their parents probably pay someone to do to help the kid to do, right? I would get paid to teach the kid tennis, and the kid would want to come, and they wouldn't want to leave. And so it's fun. So try to imagine that. Somebody's learning how to play tennis, they're learning the rules, and it's actually fun. Why? Well, because it's a game. It's fun because it's a game. And it's a game because it's fun. So you're having fun learning how to hit a tennis ball. And you're having fun learning how to hit a tennis ball in. And you're having fun learning how to hit a tennis ball in such a way that it makes you feel magnificent, makes you return to the natural flow of our bodies and the natural peace of our minds. And we discover ourselves in a new way. So let's take that metaphor and apply it to living life. In the same way, as Peace Pilgrim has said, the way you know that you're living correctly is that the way you live has given you utter, flawless peace. Utter peace within. If you experience peace within all the time, then you're living correctly. That's it. If what you live gives you peace, then you're living correctly. If not, then you're not. Something has to change. And you can explore what that is. You can consider, I wonder what that would be. The thing is that as we explore, and a few people just recently were bringing this up to me in their own personal practice, as we explore the subtle ways in which we don't feel deeply at peace, as we explore them, in general, we discover that those ways aren't so subtle after all. They're actually terrible chasms of pain in our hearts, which we haven't been looking at because it was scary. But once we start looking in that direction, we look further and further in direction and see more and more difficulty, more and more conflict, more and more confusion. And we want to find a practical way to deal with all that. It's not so easy. Of course, we hear people say all the time, ignorance is bliss. Ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance may be a kind of pleasure. You may be able to gain a shallow pleasure from it. But the problem is that we know we're lying to ourselves. Somewhere inside of ourselves, we know we're lying to ourselves because we're actually lying to ourselves. And that's an active event. That's a process that we have to actively and intentionally produce. The truth is just there. The chasms of pain within, the conflict that shatters our sanity and causes us to live in the way that we modern humans live. That's known. That's present. It's not that we have to find it. It's on the contrary that we have to cover it up. But the covering it up process is one that takes effort, that we have to actively participate in. And so we know that we're doing it because we're doing it. We know we're doing it because we're doing it. You can't be fully ignorant. And because you can't be fully ignorant, ignorant is not bliss. There's always conflict because we're always needing to cover up the parts of our hearts that we don't want to see. It has to be a constant active lie. It isn't something that we can just lie about once and then years pass and it stays lied. The lie is always breaking down, and so we have to reconstruct it day after day, and that's very difficult, tiring. And so at some point, we realize we don't want to be exhausted in that way. We don't want to fight in that way. We don't want to be constantly covering up what we know is true, and so we begin to face that conflict. And this is like the teenager, say, learning to play tennis, where we've gotten to the point when we're ready to really learn this. And what is it that we're learning? We're learning how to live a life. We're actually learning how to live an actual life. We're learning how to live our lives. we clearly see that this life isn't we're not just trying this out. Every day really matters. We're not just practicing living, we're actually living. And so what we're doing matters, and so it's necessary for us to learn how to do it well. And at that point, it's very common that we enter a place of feeling ashamed. We are ashamed that we have pain within. We feel like we shouldn't. We're ashamed that we're in conflict within. We feel like we shouldn't be. We're ashamed that we're lying to ourselves. We feel like we shouldn't be. And it all turns into an internal battle. And what I'm suggesting is that ethics is like the rules of tennis. Ethics is the way that you learn how to play this game so that you can do the only important thing. You just hit the ball cleanly. That's all it is. Hit the ball clean, that's tennis. In the same way, live without shame, that's life. That's what life is. Milarepa, one of the great Buddhist masters, his summary of all of his practice, he said, "My religion is to live and die without regret." That's it. That's the whole thing. How to live and die without regret. And so that's what we're learning to do. Learning how to be clean. Clean simply means in harmony. So how do we do it? How do we pull that off? Well, there are rules. And it's essential for us to approach these rules, I believe, as a kind of a challenge, as a game, as an exciting exploration. How do you hit the ball in tennis? Well, I don't know. But one thing is absolutely for sure, you're not going to figure it out in your head. That isn't how it works. On the contrary, you're going to hit shot after shot after shot. A bunch of them are going to go in and a bunch of them are going to go out. And you're just going to keep on doing it. And a person who gets really good at tennis is a person who has the amazing ability to simultaneously try with all of their effort to hit the ball in and also not really care about whether they hit the ball in. I know it seems strange, but this really is how it is in tennis. If you miss a shot, you don't worry about it. You just get ready for the next shot. But you also know you missed the shot. Someone asks you, did you miss that shot? You say, yeah, I missed the shot. You say, how do you feel about that? You say, I don't know. I'm not interested in that, actually. I'm ready for the next ball. In the same way, we're going to live life and we're going to make mistakes and we're going to do things well. And we have to be constantly trying to do things correctly, well, in an appropriate, good way. And also, whatever happens, we're just interested in doing the next thing as well as we can. This is a subtle skill, but it's something that we can learn from sports. As we learn the rules, the lines, as we learn how this actually works, then more and more it becomes exciting. And we actually enjoy the challenge. We enjoy entering spaces in which it's hard to behave in ethical ways. We actually like it. And those are the places where human beings are most confused. We want to, as Peace Pilgrim said, after she became prepared to go on her pilgrimage, she looked forward to the tests. She looked forward to it. She looked forward to the times when it would be hard for her to live according to her ethics. Because then she could find out, if she could, even under those circumstances. And in the same way, we have that opportunity to test ourselves every day. We awaken and we get up in the morning and we think, wow, it's going to be so fun today. There are going to be countless times when it's going to be hard for me to do what I know is right. I might not be able to, but I might be able to. And if I can, that's wonderful. And if I can't, well, then there's the next thing coming right up. There's the next ball coming. And I get to see if I can hit that one clean. That's it. That's the whole thing. It becomes an adventure. We wake up and we're excited and interested because we know that the challenges are opportunities. Okay, well, with all that said, it's important to go over what these rules actually are. As long as we have that attitude, it's important to acknowledge that there are actual rules. And Peace Pilgrim, like all of the great spiritual teachers I know of, was clear that these ethical rules are not up to us. And they don't change according to culture or according to time. These are real rules, just like physical rules. There are physical laws and there are ethical laws. The physical laws are descriptions of cause and effect in terms of matter. And ethical laws are a description of cause and effect in terms of action, in terms of intent. And we must accept them because they're not up to us. It doesn't matter what we think about them, they are what they are. And it's our job, sort of like science does with physical laws, not to decide what they are, but to discover what they are, to discover what those rules are and then act in accordance with them. So what are they? Well, the first one is simply what I just said. The first ethical point is the realization that ethics aren't up to us, that there is a reality that we need to live according to. It's very different from our modern perspective, in which we've been kind of, especially we colonial folks, have been befuddled and bewildered by our colonial centuries of colonialism, and we feel like, oh, there's just so much out there, I don't know what's right and wrong anymore. Everybody's different, so what? That bewilderment is something, that perplexity is something that we have to cut through. Understand that there is such a thing as right and wrong, correct and incorrect. Even though for a lot of us that feels very frightening, but I'd remind you, even though it's frightening, feels terrifying to talk about things like right and wrong and good and bad and should and shouldn't. A lot of the time we want this to be a path without any judgment and without good and bad and without right and wrong. And we say that, good and bad are really bad, without noticing how hypocritical that sentence is, without noticing that we ourselves are proving that we don't even believe it by labeling good and bad as bad, or saying you shouldn't say shouldn't, you shouldn't say should or shouldn't. Those sorts of things we have to get over and realize there is a place for judgment, there is a place for right and wrong, there is a place for correct and incorrect, and that place is called ethics, morality, virtue. And again, that can be fun. Of course, it's fun in a certain way to play tennis with just out in an open field and just hit the ball wherever you want, without any lines, without any rules. But the thing is, it's actually more fun than that to play on a tennis court. It is. It's a lot of fun. So these rules can be enjoyable, and it's our job to continually remind ourselves of that basic attitude, especially once we start getting into things like right and wrong. Okay, well, right and wrong is like a ball going in or out. Well, it's sort of fun to learn how to hit a ball in rather than out. After we realize that, the next fundamental, the secondary law that we have to see is very, very clear. It's what we do matters. What we do makes a difference. We are able to create suffering, and we are able to resolve suffering. We're able to be of service, and we're able to be of detriment. We're able to heal, we're able to hurt, we're able to be kind, we're able to be cruel. These are realities, and there are consequences to whatever we do. There are real consequences. It's essential that we face that, and that it isn't that there are only consequences when we notice that there are consequences. There are always consequences. Every single thing that we do has an impact. Everything we do, everything we're doing right now has an impact. Whether that's something we're doing with our bodies, with our speech, with our communication, or with our minds, our thinking, our feeling. All of that has an impact. There's nothing that we do that doesn't have an impact, because everything we do has an impact. There are consequences of everything we do. Whatever it is, every time we engage in action, there are consequences. And to face that, to accept that, is the next point of ethics. Realizing that clearly, that if we help someone, there are real consequences to that. Whether or not we see those consequences, there are consequences. If we hurt someone, there are real consequences to that. we may or may not see those consequences, and yet they're there. It's essential for us to acknowledge that fully and clearly, because to do that, it must. If we truly acknowledge that, then that invariably brings us to just one point. And that one point is called now. Right now, we're doing something. What we're doing right now is the one and only thing that makes any difference to anything. What I'm doing right now is the only thing that makes any difference. We see that absolutely clearly, and when we see that so clearly, there's only one thing to prioritize. That is, what am I doing right now? Because it's the only thing that makes any difference to anything. And then we can verify that moment after moment. We can confirm. We can try to disprove that. We can try to show that something else makes a difference. But again and again, we realize what I'm doing right now is the only thing that makes any difference. Once we see that, then then our ethical growth, our spiritual growth explodes. To see that clearly is like crossing a threshold. And the power, the depth of our spiritual growth, our psychological growth, our ethical growth, virtuous growth, changes in a way that is virtually uncontrollable. It utterly explodes. And we can then see the next point. And that is that when we behave in when we perceive things and therefore behave in ways that are, I'll use this word. It might trigger a lot of you, but as you may have noticed, I don't mind triggering people. If we perceive in ways that cause us to behave in ways that are impure, suffering results. Problems come. When we see things in ways, perceive things in ways, and therefore behave in ways that are pure, suffering is resolved. This is seen clearly. Okay, very good. So what does pure and impure mean? Pure means that our minds are not controlled by greed, hatred, or ignorance. Our perception and therefore behavior is not controlled by greed, hatred, or ignorance. That's what it means. And we learn how. We actually learn how. It's like a game. We learn how to perceive without greed. We learn how to perceive without hatred. We learn how to perceive without ignorance. And by learning how to do it, we learn how to live according to that. That living is then joyous because it turns out that the law is true. If we perceive and behave in impure ways, we suffer, and if we perceive and behave in pure ways, we don't. And we can directly confirm that that is true, and that's how the saints, the teachers, the spiritual masters have done what they've done and rejoiced in it. Very good. And then finally, we can ask for the most concrete set of rules of all. What is that utterly concrete set of rules? In terms of the Buddhist tradition, they're put into 5 rules. And these are, as I say, considered to transcend culture and time. This is just how it is. And each of us is in a position to test that for ourselves. So the first rule is not to destroy life. And if you live in the modern society, if you live in modern times, you'd better look at this as a game, because otherwise it's overwhelming. Our society destroys life at a rate and degree that is unmatched by certainly any other era of human history and possibly by any other life form in the history of this planet. We're destroying life in a way that is difficult to conceive of. Environmental destruction is occurring at a shocking rate. For thousands of years, we have killed off countless animals and certainly each other, killed off various cultures and populations. There's been a continuing acceleration of destruction of life for thousands of years. And there's only so much life, so it can't continue forever. There must be a revolution in terms of how we understand our society and how our society impacts the world. And that's up to us. That's what we ask of ourselves in this community, that we're going to create that revolution. This is our opportunity. And again, it's sort of fun. It's like a game. It's like an exciting opportunity. We can see how well we can do it. As many of you know, it's very hard to understand how to do this. We think, well, I could fly to this place and do this action that might change a law. Is the impact I have on whether that law is passed better than the damage I'm doing by flying? But this is exactly the game that we're playing. For us to continually consider these questions is exactly the fun part, because no one knows the answer. No one has ever figured this out. Even the Buddha, he lived 2,500 years ago, and we've been destroying life ever since. So no one knows how to make this shift. No one knows how to do it. What he said is true, but let's face it didn't work. So it worked for a few people, but it didn't work for the vast majority of us. And so we need to find a way to actually do this even better than whoever it is that we think has done it the best in the past. That's a great challenge. The others I'll go over because they're very important. But each of them, as I go through them, attempt to consider them in terms of, this is like a rule. And how is it that I can train myself in this rule? How can I use this rule as the arena in which my personal development is cultivated? How can that be done? So that as we enter situation after situation, we discover how to be more skillful in it. The next rule is not to steal, not to take what isn't given. So we commit ourselves to that. How do we live in a way that doesn't depend on stealing? Again, our society steals. How do we do this? How do we make a society function in a way in which stealing doesn't happen? How do I do it? How do I make a personal, in my household, for example, how do we do this? It's not so easy. The next is that we won't commit what's called sexual misconduct or sensual misconduct, but generally it's about sex, sexuality. So we don't rape people, for example. How do we maintain honest, open, clear, bright, beautiful relations in terms of sexuality? Again, we discover this isn't always so easy. It's, on the contrary, common that enormous damage is done. How does that happen? How do we actually do it? This is like an adventure to discover for each of us, to continually cultivate that skill. The next is that we won't lie. We won't intentionally miscommunicate. We won't convey what is false as what is true, whether that's with words or in any other form of communication. And again, if any of you ever tried to go through even one day without lying one way or another, then you know how hard it is. It's very difficult to say anything without slightly distorting the truth. Sometimes it's unintentional, but a lot of the time it's subtly intentional. We would prefer if someone would believe something more like this than what is true, more like what I would like them to believe. And that's including ourselves. We communicate with ourselves also each day, and it's difficult to be really honest with ourselves. And the final one is that we won't use any substances that lead to heedlessness. So the most obvious example is alcohol, and the one that's emphasized the most. But substances that cause us to be less aware of the significance of ethics. So we won't take any substances that make it harder for us to follow ethical rules, that make it harder for us to remember that what we do matters, that make it harder for us to remain aware of what we're doing and the impacts that those actions have. So again, the substantial point, the point that can change our lives and therefore change society, is that we make the shift from shame to game. No longer trying to hurt ourselves into following the rules, but on the contrary, notice that if we don't follow the rules, it already hurts, because that's the law, that's the rule. I don't have to add pain to the pain that will naturally come because I'm not following the rules of virtue. On the contrary, I can be excited to discover how to be as comfortable as I can. I want to be as comfortable as possible. I'll do whatever it takes to be as comfortable as I can be. And it turns out that the greatest comfort of all is to live without regret. We'll begin by settling into our bodies in order to clear a space in which we can do an exploration. Clear an arena in which we can play a game. Take a moment to establish a comfortable, alert, tall, relaxed posture. And with this mindset, as if this is a game, challenge yourself. Is there any way to be even more tall, upright? Is there any way to stretch up even more than I am right now? And as Christopher said, do whatever it takes. You're free to do whatever will work for you to be comfortable. So do whatever it takes Just stretch your spine. So that you feel magnificent. And you can challenge yourself with that again and again. And also, relax your posture. Relax your body. Relax each part of your body. Asking again and again, is there any way to relax my body even more? Is there any tension that isn't released, and is there any way to release it? So that these two explorations are happening together. How do we straighten up, sitting tall and magnificent, even more than we are right now? And how can we relax even more than we are right now? Please note that the question is a question. The salient word in that question is the word how. How can I sit up even straighter? To ask that question implies that we do not know the answer. If you know the answer, then just answer and then move on and ask again. Until you don't know how you could possibly sit up even straighter than you are right now. That's the place I'm asking you to get to. And then from that place of ignorance, of confusion, of not knowing, discover something new. And the same is true of relaxation. How is it possible to relax even more? Get to the point when you don't know how to do it. Come to the edge of the depths of your relaxation, and then ask from there. How is it possible to relax even more? I don't know. This is as relaxed as I know how to be. That's the place from which to ask this question. Because that's the place where we discover something new. Once again, this is a game. It's like you're practicing jumping. You're seeing how far you can jump. You don't know how far you can jump, and so you jump. And then you want to see, maybe I could jump even farther. Maybe that would be possible, to jump even farther. And so you try. And you see if it worked or it didn't work. And then you try again. The same way. Okay, this is as straight as my back can be. But wait, could it be even more straight? I wonder how that might be possible. This is as relaxed as my body can be. But wait, is there a way for my body to be even more relaxed? How can this be done? Asking those questions, however, is just the vehicle that we're using to have fun. The fun is in playing the game, a game called posture. And experiment with using the tool of your breath. Use the tool of your breath to establish posture. As you inhale, inhale in a way that straightens your back. As you exhale, exhale in a way that straightens your back. As you inhale, inhale in a way that relaxes your body. As you exhale, exhale in a way that relaxes your body. And you'll find automatically that the thoughts, the distractions that cause us anxiety, we automatically lose interest in them. Naturally, it's very common that as we lose track of those thoughts, we become tired. Because for most of us, we stay awake simply because we're so anxious. It's natural that as we set aside the source of that anxiety, our frenetic thinking, that we'd become tired. But that's why we use our breath to energize ourselves and straighten up. In this way, our minds become peaceful, our bodies become energetic. In a moment, I'll ring the bell, and for a few minutes, we'll have the opportunity to move around the room, get some water, even go outside if we like. For just a few minutes, 3 minutes or so, then I'll ring the bell again and sit down and continue the practice in stillness. Most important thing for this short movement period is that you continue with this practice. Continue to maintain the posture as you move, or if you continue to sit, as you sit. Whatever you're doing, continue with this. That's the challenge. There's as little difference as possible in terms of the practice between sitting and moving. Feel free to explore that. Continuing to use your breath to remain relaxed, even as you straighten up, connecting heaven and earth with your body. Continue to maintain this technique for a few more minutes, and then we'll use it to make an exploration. Very good. That's very good work. Now let's apply this peaceful, clear state of mind, this magnificent, energetic state of body to an investigation. Allow yourself to perceive whatever it is that you happen to perceive. In other words, don't try to control your attention. Allow your attention to wander, fluctuate, focus, obsess as it will. However, maintain throughout an awareness of that awareness. Be aware of being aware of something, whatever that is. And reflect as you're aware of it. Does this perception hurt myself or others? Is there any negative consequence to having this perception? Is there any injury? Is any suffering caused to myself or others due to paying attention to this? You may be looking at the floor, and as you look at it, you're aware that you're paying attention to the floor. And you ask the question, is there any problem with this? Is anyone being hurt? Is anyone going to be hurt? Are there any negative consequences to myself or others as a result of maintaining this perception, paying attention in this way? And we may conclude, it's up to each of us, but we may conclude, no. There's no problem with this. Very good. We may be drawn toward a thought of scorn, for example. We may look down on someone. And we can ask, is maintaining this perception, is paying attention to this hurtful to myself or others? And we may conclude, of course it's up to each of us, but we may conclude, yes, this is hurtful. This is going to cause suffering. It is causing suffering. Very good. Now we know. If we conclude that it's not hurting anyone at all, then that's good. That's like hitting the ball in tennis. We hit the ball in. If we conclude that it is hurting ourselves or others, is going to hurt ourselves or others, very good. That's like hitting the ball out. In the one case, we hit the target, like in archery. In the other case, we missed the target. In the one case, we did it correctly. In the other case, we did it incorrectly. We paid attention correctly and we paid attention incorrectly. And your challenge at that moment is to end it there, to just know that, and then remember, good news. Another perception is coming up right now. Just like another ball could be hit to you in tennis right away. So forget the last one and get to work on this one. And then you'll be aware of something else and ask again, is paying attention to this hurtful to myself or others? Just know whatever your judgment is on that. Yes or no. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. Okay, very good. And now I'm aware I did that correctly or incorrectly. I paid attention correctly or incorrectly. I perceived correctly or incorrectly. And now I'm moving on to the next one. So we just get into a flow of perception, reflection, perception, reflection, perception, reflection. Step by step, like walking, left foot, right foot. Attend and reflect in this way, in the beautiful arena you've created through mindfulness of the body. whatever the perception is, investigate it in that way. Is attending to this perception harmful to myself or others? Don't take a long time wondering about that. Draw some conclusion and then move on to the next perception, whatever your awareness is drawn to. Occasionally, of course, your awareness may be drawn to the awareness that's attending to the awareness that's attending to something. You may investigate the investigation. At that time, you can feel good because we're doing this out of compassion. We're maintaining this ethical investigation, this investigation into virtue due to compassion, desire to be of service to ourselves and others. So if you attend to that, give yourself permission to enjoy it. And know that that enjoyment also is good, is of benefit to yourself and others. as we come to the end of this session, for just a few minutes, if you'd like, allow yourself to focus on the compassion that motivates you to do this practice. Compassion for yourself, compassion for others. Motivates you to explore ethics, morality, virtue, truth. Attend to that and feel good about it. Feel good that that is present in your life, that that's a motivation in your behavior. The ability to feel good about feeling compassion is crucial in impacting the world in positive ways. It's essential that we can feel good about feeling compassion. If we do, then our compassion won't lead to exhaustion, but it will lead to awakening. Because if compassion doesn't give us emotional nourishment, we'll become exhausted. But if it gives us pleasure, then as our bodies are filled with pleasure, our minds will become concentrated and we'll become able to awaken. So spend a bit of time, if you'd like, exploring the pleasure that comes from acknowledging the compassion in our hearts. This time is yours. Feel free to talk about your experience, ask questions, comment on the exercise, engage in discussion. Anything is fine. Mm-hmm.
My meditation gave me clarity on my question, but not really the answer. As a lifelong sportsman, I played with your analogy of sports and ethics. And let's take tennis as an example. As an adult, I'll use myself. I aspired to become a tennis player, and very quickly I learned the basics, and very quickly also I learned the rules, and I played by the rules, and I expected all my partners to play by the rules. That seemed to be the least of the worries. But 5 years later, 20 years later, despite having the same, despite my best efforts, my best intents, I'm just an average, mediocre tennis player. And that's the best I can be. And if we take that analogy further, I had the basics of leading a good life instilled in me at an early age, and I got those rules, I knew those rules, and for decades I've been trying my best to live by those rules, whatever my best is able to be, but I'm still a schmuck. I'm still, I don't have the sweetest personality, I don't have the most productive do-gooder life, I'm just your average, everyday guy. Does this make Roger Federer Buddha? And
it's a good question. So,
where does doing your best, simply falling in the middle of the bell curve, as a sportsman and as leading the best life you can lead, end up for you?
Yeah, well, first of all, I like your approach to the question. That's the first thing. I really appreciate your approach. We have an interesting culture, where we say that everyone can be whatever they want. You can achieve whatever you want. You can do whatever you set your mind to. I was in a school at one point, and I was giving a in-service to the teachers. And for some reason, I had to do some arithmetic. I don't know, I think I was figuring out what time we'd finish a certain section by, so I had to add 25 minutes to 12:15, something like that. And I'm not good at that. Even now, I can't figure out what time that would be. 12:15 plus 25 minutes is some unknown number to me. So I had a whiteboard. I was trying to do it. If it's 15 plus 25, but is that the right answer? Because there are actually 60, not 100 minutes in an hour, and so does that, I don't know how this really works, actually. So, and it's hard to add 15 to 25 anyway, for me. So I mentioned to the teachers, I'm not good at arithmetic. And they were appalled that I would say something like that, because they said, in this school, everyone's good at arithmetic.
Everybody gets a gold star.
And honestly, the thing that I'm most proud of is that I'm doing okay despite the fact that I'm not that good at arithmetic. That's actually more impressive to me than if I were good at arithmetic. I'm proud of the fact that I get by. And I heard there was a talk given by, maybe some of you have heard of Michael Phelps, another sports person, very famous swimmer. And his mother gave a talk in which she used him as an example to give evidence that anyone can do what they set their mind to. And it's amazing, that isn't logical. So he actually is perfect evidence that you can't, because he did. So no one else got those gold medals. Right? Everyone else who tried failed. And that is the evidence that Michael Phelps gives us. So I appreciate your approach, because yes, it's true. We're not all going to be the number one player in the world in terms of tennis. So now let's get to your question. I think that there are two aspects of the question. One was said very nicely, so let me work on that one first. Okay? First one is Roger Federer Buddha? So in terms of tennis, is Roger Federer Buddha? Okay? Roger Federer is one of the best tennis players of all time. Many people would say the best. He's still playing, and if you don't watch tennis, then just to watch him, you should watch tennis. It's very common that people, even people who don't know anything about tennis, refer to watching him as a transcendent experience. It's really, it speaks to something beyond tennis. It speaks to something beyond, sports. I don't know of anyone else, actually, in the history of the sport who moves the way he moves. So, so the answer is no. No, he's not. He is a great tennis player, but there are two different dimensions, if you want to put it that way, in terms of what the Buddha achieved. The Buddha achieved brilliance in terms of following the rules. He did a great job. It's very impressive, the life he lived. He lived by the rules. But he also totally transcended the rules and realized something beyond the rules. And to my knowledge, Roger Federer hasn't done that, as far as I can tell. He hasn't experienced enlightenment, even in terms of tennis, even on a tennis court. Even in terms of tennis, he hasn't, despite his incredible ability. He's done a great job. He's very deep in terms of his ability to play tennis. It's deep. It really is deep. If you look at the way I talked about it, he hits the ball very clean, and he enjoys it. And yet, there's something beyond all of that, that as far as I can tell, he hasn't realized. So, so when we talk about spirituality, there's something beyond, independent of the rules. What's most impressive about the Buddha, however, beyond the fact that he lived by the rules and beyond the fact that he escaped from all the rules, is that having gone beyond the rules, he continued living within them. That's incredible. To have become bigger than the world and still fit inside of it, that's very, very impressive. It's mystical. So that's the first point. Does that answer the question of is Roger Federer?
Well, I just threw that out as a goof, kind of.
Yeah, okay, good.
To give a comparison, it was more a case of any tennis player very quickly abides by the rules and spends the rest of their playing career at whatever level abiding by the rules. So the rules are really not an issue.
Right, exactly. That's right. And it would be nice if we could say the same for ethics in the world. If everyone would abide by some very simple ethical rules, the world would be a very different place. Tennis, as you know, isn't always that harmonious. You know, people throw their tennis rackets and stuff. But it's not human society. Nobody's killing each other. If you look at the U.S. Open, which is a big tennis tournament in New York, that's the largest sporting event in the world, largest annual sporting event in the world. And it's very common that absolutely no conflict occurs between anyone attending that tournament. So that's good. You cannot say that of much of human civilization.
Oh, right.
And so it would be wonderful if, as you say, in terms of our lives, the rules could just be not an issue. But they are, and it's why I give this talk on it, and it's why it's worth working on it as much as we can. But even if we get to the point when we can follow the rules, when we're not destroying life, when we are not stealing, not lying and such, even if we can get to the point where we're following the rules, there is further to go. There is something beyond all of that. And the insight that we realize is that following the rules allows us to go beyond the rules. One similarity, though, in terms of, which I'd like to add to what you're saying, is that there's a similarity and a difference, okay? The similarity is that while we quote play by the rules in tennis, if you take the rule to be that you have to hit the ball in, well, then we often don't play by that rule. Even though we try, we hit the ball out.
Right.
And so we fail to play by that rule even though we try. In the same way, we may try to play by the rule of not destroying life and fail. We may miss day after day. Sometimes, though, we have to acknowledge in the day we succeed. We're not just destroying life constantly, right? We're not succeeding all the time. We're not failing all the time. On the contrary, it's like tennis, and this is a similarity. Sometimes we hit the ball in, sometimes we hit it out. Sometimes we destroy life, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we're unskillful, sometimes we're skillful. And so it's a continuing effort. So in that way, there's a similarity. A difference, though, is that the playing by the rules in life, the act of playing by the rules in life really matters. And the effort that we make on its own matters. There's no, if you look at tennis, you could validly claim that you're playing in a tournament, okay? It's just tennis now. That in terms of tennis, you can make the claim. I might disagree in the end, but I wouldn't say that you're saying something wrong either. You can make the claim that you're playing in a tournament, you try to hit the ball in, you try to win a tennis match, and you fail. And therefore, your efforts didn't matter. Your efforts didn't make any difference. You still lost. You still lost. Yes? Doesn't matter. You still lost. And I've had this conversation with lots of teenagers.
Sure.
And I have a very hard time saying, no, you're wrong. Because from their perspective, this is a sport. There are only two things that matter. The rules and winning and losing. And I lost. So I tried hard and I lost. That's it. And now I'm never going to be a professional, as you said. But that's all I wanted. But I'm not going to be a professional. And as you say, it's true. Some of us aren't going to be a professional. It doesn't matter what you do. You're still not going to be a professional. And they realize that. And so all the efforts I made don't matter. In terms of tennis, you could say that that's true, as long as you constrict your view to only tennis. But the efforts that you make in tennis actually do matter, because there isn't a clear boundary around tennis. It's the same mind that's living your life and is learning how to play tennis. And so the efforts you made have value in themselves, help you to become a better person in and of themselves. And in that way, in terms of ethics, there's no valid argument you can make say the effort doesn't matter. The effort does matter. The effort never doesn't matter, because it always matters. So the work we make, the work that the effort we put forth, the work we do, in order to do a good job, maybe we won't succeed in a certain way, but the effort, it has inherent value that's undeniable. And I'd suggest that we continually attempt to turn our attention to the efforts that we're making, as opposed to the states that we're in. As they say, if you want to understand the past, look at the present. And if you want to understand the future, look at the present. So the state you're in the present is a result of the efforts you've made in the past, Yes? And the state you'll be in the future is a result of the efforts you're making right now in the present. So what's happening right now has a significance in a way that transcends the specific states, the results that we see right now. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question, or did I miss it?
It makes sense in answering that question. The only thing I would ask further is, having done my very best at, say, I don't know, a dozen very different sports, in finding where I fall along the bell curve. In some cases I'm pretty good, in other cases I suck. And then applying that to try my very best, oftentimes, at living a good life. And in some metrics I've done okay, in other cases I failed miserably. Is that analogy parallel? And is the the fact that, okay, I'm not going to be I'm going to be a good bicycle racer, but only so good.
Yeah.
How does that align with, I'm going to be a good conversationalist, perhaps, but not a great, I'm going to, help raise awareness in the world, only so much.
Yeah.
And,
Okay, you got me in a corner here, so
What was my intent?
I'll get myself out of the corner the only way I know how. In terms of sports, the situation is that you're going to get better and better at it. You're going to work on a sport and get better and better. And then you know what's going to happen? You're going to get worse and worse.
Oh, yeah, you're going to peak, sure.
That's a fact. Because you're born... What?
I'm currently declining in all my sports.
Yeah, exactly. There's a point at which we will decline in every physical activity. There won't be a single physical activity that we will continue to be good at forever. That raises an interesting question, doesn't it? Is the same true of spirituality? Interesting question, isn't it? And the answer is no. That's not the case. You'll just keep on getting better, as long as you're making those efforts. Of course, if you make different efforts, you'll get worse. That's up to you. But as long as you're working on it, you'll just keep on getting better. So you'll keep on getting better and better and better. And you'd say, is it the case that in terms of, say, enlightenment, that we all fall somewhere on the bell curve? Well, no. That's not how it works at all. Not in the slightest. We're all striving. We're all on our way. And we walk this path. And we all come to the end of it and are perfectly enlightened. There's no bell curve. That's just how it is. That's how it is for all of us without exception. And if it's the case that we become fully enlightened, then perhaps we might even become Buddhas, which is to say we're perfect in every way, perfect conversationalists, etc., etc. And so, even in that way, we just keep on getting better and better. But as I've said before, the only way this perspective makes any sense is if there's some kind of cause and effect that goes beyond death. So yes, you'll be a perfect conversationalist someday. Maybe not this life. And so that's a very different perspective on things that is huge, vast, in a way that, isn't so common in the modern world. But there's a value in at least considering that perspective. Not that we have to believe in it, but there's a value in considering it. Because from that perspective, it makes sense, even in the most concrete terms, that our efforts are never wasted. And it's interesting because my tennis coach, Terry, was the first person that I remember ever saying that to me, ever saying this point to me. And he said it so humbly. He just said, your efforts always have results. I don't know why that's true, but it is. It had a huge impact on me. I was 15 at the time, and those words kept on ringing in my head. And it's important for us to explore how that might be true. Let's just see if anyone who's not a resident has anything. If not, then yes.
I'm just interested in what you said about transcendence and effort versus success and failure.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, transcendence and
The effort. The efforts.
The efforts to transcend.
I mean, well, you said you could tell that Federer hadn't transcended.
I have that sense, yes.
Yes, so I'm just curious about how do you I don't know, it seems like it's a mystery. What is transcendence of the effort?
Oh, what is transcending effort? What is transcending effort? Is that your question? So there's effort. There's then the effort to transcend, and then there's transcending the effort. Do I understand you correctly?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, transcending effort means that we have, there's a natural flow to things, which we hinder. Yes? We hinder that natural flow in two ways. One is through attachment. Attachment means hindrance. Attachment means that there's friction. Okay? And two, through our incorrect views. We look at things in ways that aren't true. And because we're looking at things in ways that aren't true, we're not in harmony. And so the natural flow doesn't flow. Natural flow is sort of a irritating term, sorry. People call it different things. God, for example. I don't know what you'd call it, nature. People fight about what to call it, so I don't know what to call it, but there's a natural flow to things. There just is. Look around. Things are flowing. Sorry, you can't deny it. So things are flowing, your breath is flowing, my hand is flowing, things are flowing, your thoughts are flowing. There's a natural flow to things, and we hinder that. We hinder it in two ways, attachment and views. So there's a point which for most of us is constant. There's a if we look at a spectrum, this whole section of the spectrum, which is where most of us spend most of our time, there's so much hindrance in our experience that we have to hinder the hindrance in order to come into harmony. It's how it is. You wish it weren't, but it is. So you accept it and you do it. And that's what concentration is. That's what effort is. That's what the striving is that we make in this path. We have to make ourselves do the right thing because so much of us wants to do some wrong thing that we also have to make ourselves do the right thing anyway. And so we have conflict within, and then we have conflict with the conflict, disabling the conflict through conflict so that we can do the right thing anyway. And it is as confused and tangled as I'm describing it. There's a point at which that's done to the extent that we've purified our minds, our awareness, our lives of the various forms of attachment, such as greed and hatred, grasping and aversion. We've purified our minds of views, ignorance, incorrect, self-centered, delusional perspectives. We've purified to the extent that the natural, subtle flow of nature is hindered little enough by the conflict within, by our hindrance of it, that its flow starts to become the leader. And at that point, we can completely drop effort. Because there's no need to make an effort anymore. The hindrance within is so little that the most effective way to overcome it is to not even try to overcome it. The natural flow of things will naturally purify our minds anyway. So only through complete acceptance of what is, we're aware of what is accurately enough, we're able to accept it fully enough, that any continuing hindrances, obstructions in our minds are naturally purified by each next experience. Because that's happening naturally, there's no need for effort. Because there's no need for effort, we drop effort. Because we drop effort, we can make more progress in a minute than we could have made in a year with effort. But the problem is there are a lot of teachers out there, and some of you know I have strong feelings about this. There are a lot of teachers out there who make effort, and then one day realize, oh, you can drop effort, and that's the most effective way forward. And then they spend the rest of their teaching career telling everyone, don't worry, don't make an effort. You don't need to. To not make effort is much more effective. Well, everything they're saying is true, but saying something true isn't actually good enough. Saying true things is relatively easy compared to being a good teacher. Being a good teacher means that you say things that are both true and useful. And what's useful for most of us is to make an effort. So the effort shouldn't be, the value of the effort shouldn't be underestimated. We make effort, and then through that effort we transcend effort. Once we transcend effort, it's very important that we stop making an effort. And what we really want is a teacher who will ask us to make an effort until we don't need to, and then will find ways of allowing us to stop making an effort once we don't need to. And it's very, very difficult to figure that out on our own. But we can. Of course we can. People have. It's not that we can't. It's just very convenient to have someone who can guide us in that. Does that answer your question?
Well, thank you. I think so.
It
certainly helped. It certainly helped to frame it and see
Yeah.
the flow and the effort.
Yeah.
That's related.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. To a large extent, of course. Yes?
Yeah, to that point, I think the
Oh.
mindfulness practice is very
Yes.
easier to see, become aware of aversion and attachment,
Yeah.
certain feelings, right, that may be subtle but can be detected.
Yeah.
But what about delusion? That's
Yeah,
hard,
it's
right?
so hard.
Right? So
Exactly.
there's nothing there.
Oh, it's so difficult, isn't it? The delusion is so difficult. And we have to stop because it's 7 o'clock, but I'll try to do this quickly. It's so hard. The first thing is just you really hit the nail on the head. That's the hard one. That's the really hard one to deal with. It's so difficult because you can't even see it. That's the definition of it, right? If you know something's delusion, it's not delusion. Delusion is delusion because you don't know that it's delusion. It's very difficult to deal with it. And what we have here is therefore what we call mindfulness. It's just moment after moment, we pay attention, we are heedful, we pay attention again and again to what is before we make anything up. Before we invent anything, before we manipulate anything, before we imagine anything. Right now, what is this? Right now, what is this? And of course, it's very hard because each of those words is associated with a concept, which in some way is mixed up in delusion for us. So it's very hard, and yet there is yet something here that's prior to conceptualization and prior to delusion. There is something. And so we continually, effortfully make the exploration to what is this? What is this now, this now, this now, prior to whatever I may believe about it. And that's the how of it. Just know that answer is entirely practical. I'm not putting forth a big philosophical theory. I'm instead giving the tool that's been passed down. Does that make sense? But more than that, it's important to know that you really hit the nail on the head. It's just really hard. And that's very important for us to see. I'll quote my mother on this one, though, actually, because she said something so nice after. I don't know if you were here for it, but I gave a very emotional talk on trustworthiness a while back, talking about how important it is that we're trustworthy. And after it, her commentary on it was, one part of being trustworthy is acknowledging that there are parts of us that are not trustworthy. And in the same way, to acknowledge that we may be deluded is the starting point to cutting through delusion. So that's why I appreciate your question so much. Okay. Is that okay? Can we stop there? Yeah, thanks a lot. All right. Well, we're a little late, but let's move into the responsibility portion.